They say the human voice can shake mountains. But on the Willow Ridge plantation, a woman's voice did something far more terrifying. It shook the hearts of the very men who thought they owned her. Her name was Avellini. And the night everything began, the night she first sang during the lashings, was the same night her owners realized something none of them could accept. Avellini was not afraid of them anymore. And whatever she was hiding, whatever lived behind those brave tear-streaked eyes, was powerful enough to keep 3 grown men awake till dawn. The wind howled outside the long wooden cabin, rattling the thin windows like an animal trying to break in. The lanterns flickered. The overseers whispered. Avellini stood in the center of the room. Hands bound in front, dress torn from days of hard labor, dust and sweat covering her like a second skin. Master Rowan, the plantation owner, stepped forward with slow, heavy boots. "She refuses to break," he muttered. 3 punishments this month. 3. And she looks at me like she ain't human." The men behind him laughed nervously. Rowan didn't. He lifted the whip. Avellini lifted her chin. And then, as the cold silence deepened, she began to sing. Not a scream. Not a cry. Not a plea for mercy. The song. Soft at first, barely louder than her trembling breath. But then the melody grew, deeper, older, ancient. A sound that didn't belong in that cabin. A sound that felt like it came from the earth itself. The men froze. Rowan's arm hovered mid-air, whip dangling uselessly. His face paled. What is she doing?" whispered Eli, the youngest overseer. Nobody answered. Because the truth was simple. No enslaved woman had ever sung during punishment. Ever. Avellini's voice rose higher, echoing through the cabin's wooden ribs, vibrating in the men's bones. It was not a happy song. It was not a sad song either. It was something in between. A voice full of pain, but also full of something more dangerous. Strength. Avellini wasn't crying. Not the way they expected. Tears streamed down her cheeks, yes, but her eyes weren't afraid. They were focused, burning, alive. As if she could see far beyond the cabin, beyond the plantation, beyond the men who claimed to own her. The more she sang, the more the men backed away. Eli whispered, "Why does it feel like she's singing to something?" Rowan swallowed hard. His hand trembled. He had whipped men twice his size, broken spirits stronger than steel. But Avellini's melody made his breath turn to ice. The walls creaked. The lantern flame rose as if pulled upward. Even the wind outside went silent. It felt like the world was listening. Avellini's voice cracked for a moment, not from weakness, but from the weight of whatever she carried inside her. Something she had kept hidden. Something she feared more than the whip. And yet something that gave her more courage than Rowan had ever seen in any person. The whip slipped from Rowan's fingers and clattered onto the wooden floor. Eli gasped. No one ever saw Master Rowan lose grip of that whip. Avellini stopped singing for one breath. Just one. And in that one breath, she locked eyes with Rowan. Her voice returned, stronger than before. Almost defiant. Almost otherworldly. Rowan stepped back. Eli whispered, trembling. "Why is she singing? Why now? Why like this?" Rowan's lips tightened. "She's hiding something." Avellini didn't look away. Didn't blink. Didn't flinch. Her voice wrapped around the room like smoke. Rowan felt a shiver crawl up his spine. It wasn't the cold. It was fear. Hours later, long after the men left the cabin, long after the wind returned, long after Avellini was locked away, Rowan lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling. He could still hear her voice. Soft, haunting, shaking his bones. Eli heard it too. So did the third overseer, Harlan. None of them slept. Because deep down, each man felt something they couldn't admit. Avellini's song wasn't just a reaction. It was a message. A warning. A truth she wasn't supposed to know. And whatever she was protecting, whatever secret she held behind that trembling voice, was big enough to terrify all 3 of them. And this was only the beginning. For 3 nights straight, the men of Willow Ridge Plantation didn't sleep. Not because Avellini screamed. Not because she begged. Not because she cursed them. Because she kept singing. Even locked inside the old storage shed behind the main cabin, her voice traveled through the night like smoke through cracks, slipping into every room, every ear, every dream. Rowan heard it first. He sat upright in his bed, gripping the blanket like the cold had crawled inside him. The melody was distant, but impossible to ignore. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It wasn't even painful. It was something worse. It was steady. Like she had made peace with something no one else could see. On the second night, Eli ran across the yard barefoot, chest heaving, eyes wide. He barged into Rowan's house without knocking. "Make her stop," he cried. "Please, please make her stop." Rowan grabbed him by the collar. "She's locked up. You think she's out there walking around?" Eli shook his head furiously. "That's just it, sir. She doesn't have to walk around. She sounds like she's right next to my bed." Rowan's grip loosened, because Rowan knew exactly what Eli meant. He had heard it too. Rhythmic, beautiful, terrifying. A voice that refused to bend. A voice that refused to break. A voice that carried a secret. On the fourth morning, Harlan, the third overseer, failed to report for duty. Rowan found him in the barn, sitting against a pile of hay, staring at nothing. His face was pale. His hands shook. "Harlan," Rowan snapped. "Get up." The man didn't move. "Did you hear her last night too?" Rowan asked quietly. Harlan nodded, barely. But then he whispered, voice cracked. "It's not the song that scares me, sir." Rowan frowned. "Then what?" Harlan's eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to wipe. "It's the way she sings, like she's forgiven us. Like she knows something we don't." Forgiven. The word hit Rowan like a stone. Slaves didn't forgive. Slaves feared. Slaves obeyed. But Avellini was doing something Rowan had never seen. She was singing like someone who had already won. That afternoon, Rowan called a meeting inside the big house. Eli sat trembling at the table. Harlan kept his eyes on the floor. Rowan walked back and forth, whip in hand, but for the first time he wasn't holding it with confidence. "We need to end this," Rowan said. "She's playing games with our minds." Eli shook his head violently. "Sir, no. If you punish her again, she'll just sing louder." Harlan whispered. "She's not afraid of pain. That's the worst part." Rowan slammed the table. "She should be afraid." But he didn't finish the sentence. Because they all knew the truth. Avellini was afraid of something. Just not them. Something else drove her to sing. Something deep. Something hidden. Something that made a grown woman face beatings with a voice instead of screams. That night, Rowan made a decision he'd never admit to anyone. He walked toward the old shed alone. The plantation was silent except for the crickets, and of course her voice. Soft, haunting, steady. He pushed open the creaking door. The lantern flickered. Dust floated in the beam of light. Avellini sat on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest, head resting against the wooden wall. Chains wrapped around her wrists, but her posture was calm, too calm. Her eyes lifted slowly. She didn't stop singing. Not even when Rowan stepped inside. He hated how her voice filled the room. How it vibrated in the walls. How it seemed to wrap around him like warm smoke. "Avellini," he said. Her singing softened. But she didn't stop. Rowan's throat tightened. "Why do you sing?" he asked. "Why don't you cry? Why don't you beg?" Avellini's lips curved into the weakest, saddest smile. She took a shaky breath. And finally, she answered. "Because someone is listening." Her voice, her speaking voice, was softer than her singing. Rowan blinked. "Who?" Avellini looked down. And whispered. "The one you fear." Rowan's blood ran cold. The lantern flickered violently. The wind outside stopped. The air thickened. Avellini's voice rose again. But this time it wasn't just singing. It was a warning. A message. A countdown. Something was coming. And Avellini knew exactly when. Rowan walked back to his house in a daze. Avellini's words replayed in his mind like a poison. The one you fear. Who was she talking about? Another slave? A runaway? A spirit? A secret ally? Nothing made sense. But one thing was clear. Avellini was not afraid of Rowan. Not of the whip. Not of punishment. Because she believed, truly believed, that someone was coming for her. And that's when Rowan finally understood the truth that kept him awake. Avellini wasn't singing out of courage. She was singing because she knew something they didn't. Something that would turn everything upside down. The storm that night was different. Not the kind that rattled windows. But the kind that rattled souls. The sky tore open with thunder as if God himself was trying to speak. Inside the plantation, candles flickered, shadows twitched, and every heartbeat seemed louder than the rain. And in the middle of all of it, Amina stood awake. She sensed something coming. Something dark. Something ending. Her wrists were bruised. Her back still carried the marks from earlier lashes. Yet her voice, her one remaining weapon, felt strangely powerful tonight. She quietly stepped to the tiny window of her quarters, watching lightning carve the sky. Then she whispered, "Tonight, I sing not to survive, but to warn. Horace paced restlessly, unable to sleep. His mind replayed Amina's voice from earlier that day. Not the melody, not the words, but the fearless tone. The tone that said, "I know something you don't." Evelyn noticed it too. She approached him with trembling hands. "Horace, what did she mean? Why does her song feel like a message?" Horace didn't answer, because he didn't know. But fear was crawling up his spine like cold fingers. At exactly midnight, Amina closed her eyes, took a breath, and started to sing. But this time, her voice carried something it never had before. Pure defiance. It wasn't a song of pain. It wasn't a song of hope. It was a warning. Slow, low, echoing like a prayer mixed with thunder. Her melody seemed to seep into the walls, into the earth, into the hearts of everyone who heard it. Other enslaved workers lifted their heads. Some whispered, "She's singing the storm. This is a sign. Something's coming." Because her lyrics were no longer random hums. They were words. Clear, sharp, prophetic. When the fire meets the truth, the chains will break, and the guilty will tremble. Horace froze. The moment the first note traveled across the courtyard, his blood chilled. Evelyn clutched her ears. Why does her voice feel like it's inside the house? Inside my chest. Because it was. Her voice traveled with an unnatural intensity, carried by thunder, carried by wind, carried by something far greater than a song. Horace grabbed his coat and stormed out into the rain. Lightning flashed, illuminating her silhouette. Hair soaked, eyes burning, lips trembling but unstoppable. Horace shouted, "Stop that song." But she didn't. If anything, she sang louder. Other enslaved workers formed a circle around her. Not touching her, but protecting her. Not a single guard dared to interrupt. Because the storm responded to her voice. Each high note followed by thunder. Each whisper followed by wind. It felt supernatural. Horace stepped closer, but he hesitated. Fear wrapped around his throat like an invisible rope. He finally yelled, "What are you singing? What do you know?" Amina opened her eyes slowly, and her voice dropped to a chilling whisper. "The truth you tried to bury is waking up." Lightning struck so close that Horace stumbled backward. The enslaved workers gasped. Amina's final note echoed through the night like a warning drumbeat. And with that, the entire plantation fell into dead silence. Except for Amina, who stood there, staring at Horace with a calmness that terrified him more than her voice. Because he finally realized, she wasn't singing to survive anymore. She was singing because she knew something. Something that could destroy him. The storm died suddenly. No rain. No wind. No thunder. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels wrong, like the world is holding its breath. Amina stood in the center of that silence. Rain dripping from her fingertips. Her voice finally quiet. But her eyes were burning with a truth she was ready to unleash. Horace stepped back, shaken. For the first time in years, the man who whipped, ordered, and terrified others was afraid of a slave woman's silence. Amina lifted her chin and said softly, "You're not the only one with power here, Horace." The enslaved people around her stiffened. This was not a warning. This was a declaration. Horace forced a laugh, but his voice cracked. "You're just a girl with a voice." Amina took one step forward. "A voice that can end you." Horace froze. Because suddenly, it wasn't just the song that frightened him. It was the certainty in her tone. The same woman he thought he had broken was standing like someone who held a weapon he couldn't see. The main house door swung open. Evelyn stood there, soaked, pale, shaking. She whispered, "Horace, she knows." Horace snapped. "Knows what?" But Evelyn didn't answer. She couldn't even step closer. Her eyes were locked on Amina with the same terror found in someone staring at their own crime. And Amina smiled. Not kindly, not cruelly, but knowingly. Amina's voice carried through the courtyard, steady and cold. 7 years ago, you brought a woman into that house." Horace stiffened. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. "A woman you kept hidden, because she was pregnant." Gasps rose from the enslaved workers. Evelyn whispered, "Amina, please," as if begging her not to continue. But Amina did. A baby was born that night. Horace's breath caught. Thunder rumbled again, distant, as if nature itself leaned in to listen. "A baby you said didn't survive." Horace shouted, "Enough." Amina raised her voice over his. "But I saw everything." Evelyn collapsed onto the muddy ground. Horace's face turned white. Because now, the secret he buried deeper than any grave was no longer buried. Amina stepped closer until she was just a few feet away from Horace. The enslaved workers parted, creating a path for her. She spoke softly but with a blade-sharp clarity. The child didn't die. Horace's jaw dropped. Evelyn covered her face, sobbing. Amina continued, "You hid him. You lied about him. And you punished anyone who even whispered his name." The crowd murmured in disbelief. Horace whispered, trembling, "You weren't supposed to know." Amina leaned in. "I didn't just know. I kept him alive." The entire plantation seemed to exhale at once. Horace staggered backward, like the ground had given way beneath him. Because Amina had just revealed the one truth that could rip his world apart. Not with violence, not with rebellion, but with truth. Amina's voice softened. "That song tonight wasn't for me." Horace swallowed hard. "It was for him." Evelyn gasped. Horace's knees buckled. Amina whispered the final blow. "Your son." A clap of thunder split the sky. Horace collapsed into ditch. Horace knelt in the mud, rain washing over his face. But nothing could wash away the truth Amina had spoken. He had a son. And the woman he had whipped for years was the one who saved him. Evelyn's cries echoed across the courtyard. The enslaved workers stood frozen, their hearts pounding as if they were witnessing the end of an era. Amina stood tall in front of them. A woman who had been beaten, silenced, humiliated, but now stood like a storm made flesh. Horace tries to deny it, but fails. Horace croaked, "You're lying, you have to be lying." But his voice betrayed him. Amina shook her head gently. "You think I would sing through your beatings for nothing?" Her words cut deeper than any physical strike. Amina took a slow step toward him. "I sang to keep him alive. A secret buried in the woods." Evelyn whispered through tears. Where is the child?" Amina turned her gaze to the dark tree line behind the fields. "Safe." Horace grabbed a handful of mud, his hands shaking. "He's my blood. I demand." Amina's voice thundered. "You lost the right to demand anything the night you tried to destroy him." Horace froze, the reality hitting him like a whip to the chest. For the first time in his life, he wasn't a master. He was a man afraid of the truth. The workers stepped forward. One by one, the enslaved people walked closer. Not attacking, not shouting, just standing, forming a circle around Amina. A silent declaration. "We are with her, not you." Horace looked around, seeing not defiance but awakening. He roared, "Back to your quarters. Now." No one moved. Their eyes remained locked on Amina. And suddenly Horace understood. He had lost the room. He had lost his power. He had lost control. Amina finally tells the full truth. Amina breathed deeply, and began. "That woman you hid here, the one who gave birth, was not just another slave." Evelyn lifted her head, trembling. "Tell him, Amina." Amina whispered, "She was your lover." Horace's face drained of color. "The relationship you denied. The child you denied. The woman you abandoned to death." Horace shook violently. "She begged you to claim the boy." Amina's voice cracked for the first time. "And when you refused, she died of heartbreak, not childbirth." Gasps broke around the courtyard. Horace covered his face, sobbing silently. Amina knelt beside him. He flinched. Not from pain, but from guilt. She whispered, "Your son heard her crying for you. The reason she sang." Horace whispered, Why did you help him?" Amina wiped water from her face. "Because I saw myself in him." Her voice steadied. "Because no child should grow up believing they are unworthy of love." And then the truth that destroyed Horace landed. "I sang during the beatings not because I was strong." Everyone leaned in. But because he was hiding under the floorboards listening. Horace's eyes widened in horror. Amina continued, "If he heard silence, he would think I was dead." The courtyard fell utterly still. "I survived so he would believe he could survive too." Tears streamed down Evelyn's face. Horace broke completely. A new dawn, and a new fear. Amina stood and looked at everyone. "The boy is coming back tomorrow." Horace gasped. Evelyn whispered, What does he want?" Amina answered, "The truth." Horace shook his head violently. I can't face him." Amina turned away. "You will." Because for the first time, Horace wasn't terrified of rebellion, or revenge, or even Amina. He was terrified of a 12-year-old boy, who carried the ghost of his mother, and a truth he could no longer bury. A final image, the song returns. Amina walked toward her small cabin. the workers following behind her like a quiet army. Just before she reached the door, she stopped. She looked over her shoulder at the broken man in the mud, and she whispered the first line of the same haunting lullaby she used to sing through the beatings. Only this time, it wasn't a cry of survival. It was a warning, a promise, and a beginning. Mud, Evelyn screamed, and every enslaved worker felt chills ripple through their bodies, because suddenly the years of singing during beatings, the strange bravery, the storm-covered melodies, all made sense. Amina had been protecting something far greater than herself. She was protecting his child. Some stories don't end when the night ends. Some scars don't fade when the sun rises. Beat, slow fade of thunder in the background. And Amina's song was one of them. Pause, softer voice. It was a warning, a memory, and a promise that the truth always returns, even when the world tries to bury it. Music grows slightly, wind sound brushes through. Narrator. Tomorrow the boy returns. The son of a woman silenced. The fear of a master who thought he would never face judgment. Beat. And when that child steps onto that plantation, nothing will ever be the same again. Long dramatic pause. Narrator whisper. This was not the end, Yadi. This was the beginning of the reckoning. Music fades into a single heartbeat. Narrator final line. Join me in the next story, where history whispers louder than the men who tried to erase it. Outro dips to black.